Now, here is a very interesting helmet. And by now, if I asked you where your level would be as far as helmets, I'm sure it's bumped up a number or two, and you would clearly be able to tell me that this is a coal bucket style helmet, it is a World War I helmet, and it does have the components of a Model 18 because it doesn't have the studs on the side here. But you certainly recognize that here we're looking at something very, very different. The color's changed, and it also has insignia, okay? It has insignia on both sides. So I turn it around to this side, and there's the insignia on the other side, okay? And the internal components are set up very similar to the earliest model 1916 with the 3 pads and the leather liner band. But it isn't a 1916 because it doesn't have those studs on the inside. So what is it? It's a Model 18 type, made probably in fairly small numbers by a private contractor for what organization? Okay, Robert, what organization? SS, okay? And so here you have the very, very visible, emphatic symbols of the Schutzstaffel, the State Guard, the SS. Not around during World War I, but certainly around during the transitional period between World War I and World War II in the late 20s, early 30s. And they were a fairly small unit to begin with, and they had an issue on their hands. And that is, as the need for helmets in the late 20s, early 30s, and the very first part of the Third Reich became greater, and the need to find companies to produce those helmets became harder, the contracts were going to all of the bigwigs, and that would be the the 2 main services, the Army and the Navy, because they had been around for a long time, they had all the high-ranking officers, they had contacts with the industrialists, and so on and so forth. So when the SS first came on the scene, one of the things they couldn't get was helmets. They had a very difficult time getting helmets. And so they had to reach out and find a producer to make the helmet for the SS. And we're not going to spend a great deal of time on this. There are 5 or 6 variations of it. There's what they call the RZM SS helmet. But suffice to say that there are a number of different SS helmets made late 20s, early 30s, the transition period between the end of the Weimar and the beginning of the Third Reich. And that is why we have reference material to go to. That is why we have forums. That is why you have the Wilson History and Research Center to serve as a reference, as a resource to be able to study those in more detail. But here is an example of a transitional helmet made during the time period that we're talking about right now. The other 2 characteristics of this helmet are quite obvious, and that is it's painted black. And that is the characteristic that everybody associates with the SS. And the second thing is that it has decals, a transfer, something that is put onto the helmet, that's made to put onto the helmet. Early SS helmets, when they were first getting going, might have had hand-painted insignia. And they really did. There are many, many photos that back up that evidence. That makes it more difficult for us as collectors to establish originality, but there are many, many helmets that do have hand-painted insignia. And you have the 2 components. You have the one that is the double lightning bolts for the SS, the only organization that used that. They certainly did that with a purpose in mind, to get your attention. And then you have on the other side, this is not the best example of it, but it will give you an idea. I'll show you other examples of what is called the state shield. The state shield or the party shield. And that essentially is a SWAT sticker in a white background on a red field. And I have other examples that I can show you of that. But a highly collectible, highly desirable helmet. So when one buys one of these, if you can find one that's at least original, you would be more willing to put up with, and we're going to talk about this later on, where is value established and so on and so forth. But here is an original helmet in as found condition, but still highly desirable because of the organization that it represents. So, okay, so that is another transitional helmet used after World War I. And do those helmets stick around when the Third Reich begins and we're getting now into the 1930s and so on and so forth? The answer is yes, of course they did, because they were used initially by the parade troops and so on and so forth, and they were also used later on by the Home Guard. They were used at schools. They were used at training facilities. They were used at the end, Volkstrom. So you'll actually possibly see as late as 1945 somebody wearing a black helmet of that nature. And that, by the way, when you have a black helmet and it's the SS helmet like that, it's referred to as the Allgemeine SS. Allgemeine means general SS. And that is the first units of the SS were Allgemeine.